What is going on, New York Giant fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Big Blue in the Bronx podcast. Make sure you hit that like button, comment, and subscribe. Turn on post notifications so you know when live stream pops or drops. Share this out as well. Appreciate y'all guys coming back. Also, 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. I'm not sounding as stuffy as I was, and my voice is finally back to at least mostly normal. So you won't get a lot of this talk. But anyway, we've finally made it to a week that Giant fans and Jet fans have been looking for, no matter how the season kind of rode out for these two teams. You got the Jets, who Aaron Rodgers got hurt in week 1. Zach Wilson's been taking the cover. That team is at 3-3, coming off a bye against a New York Giants team that won against Washington. They're right now sitting at 2-5. 3-5 doesn't look as bad as 2-6. And again, we'll see what happens in this game. The Giants obviously banged up with a couple of different injuries. As for the Jets, they have some injuries, but they're not too significant, or at least as related as the Giants. So as far as this game goes, let's talk about first thoughts, and then we'll get into everything else. I would just like to say shout-outs to Mr. Matt O'Leary. We have the second half of the show with him. He's a popular figure on Jets YouTube. Guys, go check out his Jets stuff, and he also does some betting in there as well. If you guys remember the first Rise and Rush podcast where we had Joe Maniello, he works closely with Mr. Matt O'Leary on some betting stuff. But anyway, so these two teams come in here, and it means more for the Giants than it really does for the Jets because, let's see, the Giants, Tyrod Taylor's in. Daniel Jones is not going to play this week. And it's going to be judging some different things, but, you know, some things are just like, hey, you know, it doesn't really matter anyway. But their schedule down the stretch starts to get easier. And if you're a Giants fan, you want to believe that this team can still make the playoffs. So if they do win this game, you can cap that off. And then 3-5, Raiders 4-5, Cowboys, you're probably going in, and that's another loss. That's 4-6. But then if you win against the Patriots and the Commanders, I think you're, 6-6 at the bye week, which isn't a bad look. And then you face the Packers. You might have to pull out some nail-biters in the end against the Rams, maybe one against the Eagles or whatnot, but you get there when you get there. And we won't talk about that if the Giants don't win this game, if they don't win against the Raiders and stuff like that. As for the Jets, I mean, I think they're a solid football team. I do think there is a huge question mark at quarterback, but they do have some easier games, and they've really stuck with some teams, defensively. They stuck with the Chiefs. They made Patrick Mahomes throw a couple interceptions. They made Jalen Hurts have a couple of turnovers, and Josh Allen, he had 4 turnovers against the New York Jets. And that's one thing that the Jets have really done well, is they've committed a lot of turnovers. Now, their defense in total stats doesn't look totally appetizing, but sometimes the stats do tell a different story because, hey, maybe the Jets gave up this many yards in this game and it just hasn't trickled down. And we'll talk about that, of course. But I do want to go to the injury report for the New York Giants and the New York Jets. We'll start out with the New York Jets, the quote-unquote away team. Randall Cobb is questionable with a shoulder injury. We got Joe Tippmann, who is out with a quad injury. He came out of the Eagles game injured. It's going to be Wes Schweitzer versus Dexter Lawrence. Michael Carter, full practice on Friday, hamstring injury. He's questionable, so he's probably going to play. And Irvin Charles, who's more of a special teamer but is a wide receiver, he's doubtful to play with a shoulder injury. Will McDonald is questionable with a back injury. He was put on the injury report late, but it looks like he's going to play if he gets a chance because it seems as though the last few weeks he really hasn't gotten a fair share of snaps. And, you know, we talk about that a lot in the second half of the show. When we go into the Jets' background, talk about Carl Lawson and the trade deadline. For the New York Giants, it's still kind of a laundry list, but you do have a positive, what looks to be a positive right now, and that's John Michael Schmidt's questionable, which means, hey, he might be coming back. Daniel Jones, we already said he's out. Andrew Thomas is doubtful. Beginning of the week, I was a tad optimistic about the New York Giants bringing him back for this week, but then I saw this article from Paul Schwartz. I'm like, it's not going to be this week, is it? Gary Brightwell, he is out with a hamstring injury. We're going to talk about some of the running backs and really what the running back room is going to look like, to be honest with you, and the things to look for because, a lot of people are talking about this, that, and the other thing, And I know it's not too big of a subject, but the Giants have added Jashawn Corbin, which we'll get into. The Giants have added Deion Jackson, which we'll get into. And that's the backfield right now, other than Matt Breida and Saquon Barkley. So Dory Jackson is questionable with a neck injury. He didn't go last week, so maybe he goes this week. Maybe. Evan Neal's questionable with an ankle injury. Hopefully he goes. The offensive line didn't do too bad against the Commandos, but the Jets are a totally different force. Kayvon Thibodeau's questionable with a knee injury. I don't think there should be any questions as to whether he's playing unless it's something they've kept under wraps the entire week. And Darren Waller questionable with a hamstring injury. He's been questionable pretty much most of the year with a hamstring injury. He's probably going to play. Leonard Williams is fine. Saquon Barkley is fine. Graham Gano is fine. Wandell's fine. Dexter Lawrence is fine. So let's go to the stats. Jets, offensively, they're kind of like us. They're kind of like us except for the rushing category, which they succeed a little bit more. They are 30th in total yards per game, 32nd in passing offense, 12th in rushing offense, and 22nd in points per game. Defense-wise, 24th in total yards per game, 15th against the pass, 26th versus the run, and 13th in points per game. You look at offensive analytics, they are 8th in pass percentage, 25th in run percentage, 4th in pass percentage on first down, 8th in run percentage on first down. They are 31st in blitz percentage, 3rd in pressure percentage, and 24th in sacks. So a little bit of a mixed bag there right there. For the Giants, they're 29th in the total yards and passing offense categories. They're 21st in rushing and 32nd in points. Defense, 23rd in total yards, 14th against the pass, 27th against the run, and 23rd in points. Now you take a look at the offensive analytics. They're 12th in pass percentage, 21st in run percentage, 29th in pass percentage on first down, 17th in run percentage on first down, 3rd in blitz percentage, 20th in pressure percentage, and 30th in sacks. So, just a little tale of the sides. Well, I should say, better yet, there's two sides of the story always when it comes to stats and stuff like that, and we'll get into that as, when we get into the players. The Giants, we pretty much already know what the situation is. They really haven't had a consistent pass rush. They didn't get to Josh Allen, but they got to Sam Howell a few times. They didn't get to Dak Prescott. They didn't get to Josh Dobbs. So, that's where the Giants defense is there. But, they blitz a lot, and that's Wink Martindale's thing. It has been for the past 2 years. But I promise we'll touch on the Jets when we get to that side of things. So, speaking of blitzing, things to look for. We'll talk about rolling out Zach in a minute, but blitzing Zach from 20 different angles. I personally think, and the offense kind of shows it as well, that Zach Wilson can be manipulated, right? And I just don't feel like defenses enough have done a good job of doing that. Or maybe it's because Zach Wilson's growing as a quarterback, and he's kind of just putting himself in spots to where he's not easily manipulated by defenses, or he's, locking onto one read. It's stuff like that. He could have easily thrown 2-3 picks against the Eagles. Could have done that against Kansas City. I know he had the fumble, which he blames on himself. And there was a couple other games as well. And you think, wait a minute, Zach Wilson, isn't he this turnover-prone guy, and he's faced some really good defenses. Well, this game we're going to see, in my opinion, now, I haven't given the Giants defense too much praise over the entire year, but the last 2-3 weeks they kind of deserve it because they've created turnovers, they've held teams to 14 points at most. I mean, the Bills, that was that game, and then Washington to 7 points. So, in my personal opinion, it also depends on the offensive line too. You're going to see whether Zach is a changed quarterback, whether he's, upgraded to game manager, or whether he's the same old Zach Wilson. Maybe he was just bluffing us for, the few games or whatnot. Now, rolling Zach out, I will say this. They do like to do that, and, I try not to criticize coaches in some certain areas that I don't know football, but one thing that Eric Bieniemy didn't take advantage of last week was rolling Sam Howell out of the pocket. I think he adjusted way too late for that. I think Washington football fans, Commander fans, whatever, they will say that too. Because you saw, I think it was a 4th down and 1. They rolled him out, tossed right, and he was there. Meanwhile, most of the other time, he couldn't get out of the pocket because the contain was so good. You had Kayvon Thibodeau coming in. You had this guy coming in. You had Jason Pinnock blitzing off the left side of the defense. So, I mean, that's what the Giants are going to do. But rolling Zach out is something that the Jets have been successful with. Now, has it worked 100% of the time? No, it hasn't. But the Giants have to really keep an eye on that. And I hope they watch the film on that, because rolling Zach out of the pocket, trying a backyard football vibe, that's what Zach is really, really good at. Also, hurry up offense. Now, they're probably not going to do this every drive, because time of possession, you would like to have that on your side. And sometimes hurry up offense doesn't equate to anything, because you may not score 7, or you may not even score 3 at the end of it. But some of these off-platform, off-script type plays, again, that's what Zach Wilson is good at, or at least he's solid at that, and Jets fans know that more than anybody else. So rolling Zach out in the hurry-up offense, and also a use of play action, too, that's really helped out. They faced a very weak secondary against the Eagles, but they also had a little bit of a run game, plus Jalen Hurts turning over the ball a few times. That helped them out, and all these other different things. But also, I would say this, right? Talk about the Jets offense. Heavy use of Breece Hall. Now, a lot of people are like, well, the Giants got to be legitimately scared of Breece Hall. I don't disagree to any sort of standard. I don't disagree. Here's the problem, though. Here's the problem I have. There's 2 things. Number 1, I have legitimate confidence in Bobby Okereke and Micah McFadden to start really playing elite-level football at the linebacker position. Now, not elite as in Pro Bowl, but compared to the linebackers we've seen over the past few years, Week 4, they started turning it up. Actually, no, it wasn't Week 4. Maybe in Week 4. Week 5 against the Dolphins, they definitely started turning it up. McFadden was injured for that game. Week 6 against the Bills, they started turning it up a little bit more. And then Week 7 against the Commanders, they have not reached their peak yet, but they're playing in their prime of the defense. And when they're playing really well, that's when the defense is overall playing well. And that's when we can commend them. But, so you got that. I wouldn't factor that in as much if it wasn't for also another thing. I'm not taking a shot just to take a shot. I've watched Jet football games, so I know what the pulse of the Jets fan base is. I happen to have a Jets fan best friend, who you guys know, Jets fan brother, and I know multiple Jet fans. Nathaniel Hackett is extremely predictable when it comes to first and second down runs. If the Giants know that's coming, and I don't think they'll stack the box, but if they do stack the box, I would expect Xavier McKinney, Jason Pinnock, along with McFadden and Okereke to make some tackles, and then that positions them in third down and long to where, in my opinion, I'm going to be honest here, I say this in the second half, I'm not scared of the Jets' offensive weapons other than Garrett Wilson, because Lazard doesn't move the needle much for me. Randall Cobb is washed. Xavier Gibson, he's got some speed, but he needs to get more in the offense. Conklin, Uzama, they're average. And Jeremy Ruckert, I think he could maybe have a few extra yards. But, other than that, I think the biggest benefit that the Giants can get in terms of, this whole thing when it comes to playing the Jets offense is reading the predictabilities by Nathaniel Hackett in the offense. And even then, whether he's being predictable or not, just give Zach different disguises, different looks on the defensive side of the ball. Have him make mistakes, third down and long, have him in jail, put him in jail. So let's go to the Giants offense. Now, Giants ground and pound with Saquon. Now, I don't think they'll go ground and pound. I don't think they should do it either way, whether they want a run system or whether they're going to try to balance it out. Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed are coming back for this game. And they're 2 very good corners. We can't mess around with them. Tyrod can't make too many lethal mistakes unless, what happens, like what happened in the preseason where Jalen Hyatt does beat Sauce Gardner. Now, going back to the Giants and the ground and pound, stuff like that, they got a couple of capable running backs in that room. Now, granted, Breida, Barkley, they're the 2 head cows. And then the 2 other guys, you got Ja'Shawn Corbin and Deion Jackson. Now, are any of them going to be inactive? That's the question. The other question is this, and I kind of factor in a little special teams here before we get to the rest of the offenses. Gunnar Olszewski, he is a punt returner. Now, I gotta get to Thomas McGahee's comment in a second. I'm just gonna leave that before we get to players to watch because he's unbelievable. But Gunnar Olszewski, he's gonna be punt returning. I don't think he's a kick returner. I think he's more on the punt side. I'm actually gonna do a live lookup for you guys. So as far as Gunnar Olszewski goes, let's go with special teams. Where are we? Kick and punt returns. Okay, so he's got 2 kickoff returns this year for Pittsburgh, averaging 12 yards. That's not good. So it just tells me that he was not the main kick returner in Pittsburgh. Maybe it was somebody else. I don't know if it was Anthony McFarland, if he is even still playing for them. So I'm not in touch with the Steelers fan base like that. I'm going to be honest with you guys. But that leaves a hole at kick returner because you got Gary Brightwell, who's out, and Eric Gray's on the IR. So you could have, now I don't know if Deion Jackson's special teams like kick returner. He is special teams, but Jashawn Corbin, I mean, I kind of been banging the table since last summer to make him primary kick returner. This is his chance, man. This is his chance, and I know, obviously, when Gray gets back, whenever that is, hopefully he does get back, there's going to be some conflict in that running back room. But my, oh my, I mean, that puts a conflict in. Special teams, running backs. So if the Giants do want to give Corbin and Deion Jackson some carries, they could give him some carries. You know what? I think another thing, too, is the Giants could use some swing passes. Here's my fear about that. They have some very good linebackers. Now, they're not elite linebackers, but there's one that scares me the most, and it's not C.J. Mosley. It's Quincy Williams. He is playing at an elite level. He's playing at a fast pace. I would argue he's a Pro Bowler. He's one of the quicker linebackers that I've seen play for the Jets. And the Giants don't have elite speed coming out of the backfield like Christian McCaffrey when it comes to like the receiving game. But if you want to throw some swing passes, Jashawn Corbin, he caught a lot of passes at Florida State, and I think he's a solid backfield receiver. I don't know too much about Deion Jackson in that field. Barkley, you could do your usual. I mean, I know that play worked, in the little out type thingy against the Commanders in Week 7, and then also Matt Breida is out there. So you could do some swing passes to kind of help you out, and that goes a little bit into the Jets' pass rushers. We'll get more into them, but they have a fortress of pass rushers. Will McDonald, their first-round pick, I again, argue that they should play him more, maybe not this week, but maybe next week, but they should play him more in all seriousness. You got Jermaine Johnson. You got Bryce Huff, who I wanted to trade for, but the Jets actually kept him, which is a good thing for them. Quinn Williams, who's kind of like Dexter Lawrence, who really hasn't gotten on the stat sheet this year, but his impact is being felt in the running game and all these different things. You got John Franklin Myers. You also got Quentin Jefferson, who's their leading sacker. So they have multiple guys they could go to going up against this Giants offensive line where there's a couple of pieces pending. Center, JMS looks like he's going to play, and coming back against the guy in Quentin Williams, I mean, that's going to be a tough task. So he's got to handle the double teams well. You got Evan Neal, who I'm going to say for right now will come back. I haven't heard anything otherwise, unless it's a long-term ankle injury. But for the time being, we'll say Evan Neal is coming back. You place him on the right side. Where do you put Tyree Phillips? Do you move him inside? Do you move somebody else? It's going to be interesting, and it's even going to be more interesting when Andrew Thomas comes back. I was having this conversation with somebody on Twitter, and when Andrew Thomas comes back, it's going to be so much easier because right now you have guards playing tackle. That's what it is. You have 5 guards playing tackle and center and guard. But this game, you're going to need help, and I think someone who's going to struggle big time, I'm not worried about Evan Neal as much. I'm worried about Justin Pugh, and I got to give it to him on a leadership standpoint because, he's a guy that came in and, he's a lot mouthy, and mouthy in a good way, too. It's like, he's getting these guys ramped up, and he's just got the right voice for leadership among the Giants offensive linemen. And I literally asked this a few weeks ago, maybe even a couple of days ago. I said, what are these Giants offensive linemen doing to prepare themselves for games? Because every single frigging game, it's a new combo. So Pat Leonard comes out with an article, says Justin Pugh takes these guys out. I think it's like 6:30 every Thursday or something like that to a new steakhouse, rotating steakhouses. And Justin Pugh even said on Twitter, he's like, if you guys got any recommendations, throw them in the comment section. So that's a leader. Like, that is a leader. That's a captain. Now, probably won't be promoted to captain, but that's a guy you would like to keep around. So I would imagine Pugh stays on the offensive line when, all these different guys start coming back from injury, especially Andrew Thomas. But yeah, the Jets swapping in multiple pass rushers, that's something we're going to see. And again, they're not a high blitz team because they get there pressure-wise with their front four. Robert Saleh said it. Anyone who watches Jets football says it and, can see with their eyeballs. Now, before we get to players to watch, I did promise this. So I don't know if you guys saw in the press conferences, Thomas McGahee was asked something about special teams, punt returning, whatever. Do I got some Yankee fans in the audience? Got some Yankee fans in the audience? Bet you've heard this one before. So if you guys don't know, they tore down the racetrack next to MetLife Stadium. And this was implemented just before the season because I remember coming to training camp the first day, and I'm like, where the hell did that building and the racetrack go? So it's all gone. So Thomas McGahee, instead of, I guess, taking accountability, said, yeah, that wind is no longer even. It's no longer even because they took out the racetrack and now it's just a disadvantage for us. He basically said that. The full quote is on Twitter. You could probably find it maybe on the SNY YouTube channel, but SNY has a couple other outlets that have it. And my question is this. Really? Because let's see, you switch sides every single friggin' quarter. So there's that. B, I don't know. Let's see. Let's go through the home games. Week 1, Dallas didn't fumble a single punt return. Week 4, no fumbled punt returns there. And week 7, Commanders didn't fumble any punt returns. So why is it just the Giants? And it's not like there's some great punters that we face every week. I mean, yeah, we face some pretty good punters. Tress Way, he's been a veteran in this league. Michael Dixon. And before that was Brian Anger. I mean, they're solid punters, but goddamn, the excuse making. Why did I reference Yankee fans? Because you guys remember it was last year. Oh, the roof was open. The roof was open. That's why the Yankees were not hitting home runs. So a similar built-in excuse. Unbelievable, man. Unbelievable. Players to watch. Let's start with Zach Wilson. So still a low count of touchdowns in 6 games. 4 touchdowns, 5 picks, 19 sacks taken, 1,097 yards. His completion percentage is at 60.4%, and that's obviously not where you want it. And he's one of the more gunslingers, so he's not going to have persistent completion percentage. It's the highest of his career, but it depends what the Jets want him as. Do they want him as that low ceiling type game manager? Do they want to try to develop him more into a gunslinger? We'll see. But Zach Wilson definitely is a player to watch, and I always really watch the quarterback because guess what? They're the head of the offense. Even if it was Jake Fromm, I'd say, okay, Jake Fromm, this stat, that stat, he's thrown 7 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. I would still preview him. We go to Breece Hall. We talked about him. He's got 2 touchdowns on the season. His longest was an 83-yard run. I believe that took place either against Buffalo. I think it was against Buffalo. He also had a very big run against the Denver Broncos, which they currently rank as the worst defense in the NFL. And, if the Giants, again, if they don't read that, Nathaniel Hackett's being predictable, they don't read the run keys, they don't stay gap disciplined, Breece Hall is bound to have another good game. He didn't really pop off too much against the Philadelphia Eagles. So he's going to look, 3 weeks since that game against the Broncos. He's going to look for some blood. He's 10th in the NFL this season in rushing yards behind Kenneth Walker, Kyron Williams, Devon Achane, Raheem Mostert, James Cook, Travis Etienne, Zach Moss, DeAndre Swift, and Christian McCaffrey, of course. You go to Garrett Wilson, who's had a solid year. 32 receptions, 369 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's their best target. So I think that, Adoree may play against him. I think it also could be a nice test. Deonte Banks. Now, there's that touchdown that's going around Twitter of Garrett Wilson beating Banks when it was Ohio State, Maryland. But that was also, Wilson was drafted in 22? So it could have been 2021 or 2020. So that was a little bit of a time ago. So these players have both improved on their craft. But anyway, we have that to get to. And I'll read out the stats for other Jet offensive players. As I said, I'm not too scared by the rest of them. C.J. Uzomah has a passing touch. Well, I should say not a passing touchdown, but a receiving touchdown. 22 yards on 4 catches. Allen Lazard, 210 yards, 14 catches, 1 touchdown. Tyler Conklin, 227 yards, 20 receptions. And then Breece Hall. That's one thing also as well. Now, I don't know if they have picked up on it. Personally, me. I don't know if they've picked up on it, but a lot of Jet fans are calling for Breece Hall to be utilized a little bit more coming out of the backfield as a receiver. Bobby Okereke, Micah McFadden, Isaiah Simmons. I would watch that. Some swing passes, give Zach some easy stuff. Screens too. The Jets love to run screens when it's opportune. Also, I wouldn't look for much Dalvin Cook involvement. If that would be a good thing if he does get involved for the Giants defense, because if you've been watching some Jet football, Dalvin Cook looks legitimately washed. Gonna be honest with you. You ask most Jet fans, you've seen the game film, Dalvin Cook looks washed. And a lot of Jet fans are like, dude, why are you complaining about your role? You can't get going anyway. So anyway, that's that. Also as well, this is more of a thing for Kayvon Thibodeau. If the Giants activate any edge rusher, they should, honestly. I think they should bring up either Zimenez. I think he's out of activations, though. Justin Hollins would be one. If we still have Tamon Fox on the practice squad, that'd be another. But any of the edge rushers, Jahad Ward, those guys, edge players, I would look at Jeremy Ruckert. Now, I'm not saying look at him as like, oh my God, he's this great pass catcher. No, he hasn't shown that. And, Zach Wilson hasn't gotten him the ball enough, and he's got some explosive playability possibly. But I would look at him as a very dominant run blocker. I think he's very underrated, and that's why the Jets' offense really gets going is because Breece Hall, you got Jeremy Ruckert as a key blocker, and again, they are sometimes predictable. They're not the Dolphins where they throw out of running sets where they got like 3 tight ends and all these different things, and then the I formation. No, sometimes they're very predictable. Again, going back to the first and second down runs, they're not just predictable with play call, but personnel too. If you see 3 tight ends set, more than likely, it's probably going to be a run. But even when you're looking at a run, Jeremy Ruckert, you want to beat him. Kayvon Thibodeau, a lot of people have been talking smack about you. But again, I'll leave that for the matchups later on. Expected O-line. We got Mekhi Becton, who's given up 4 sacks, 7 penalties on the year. Laken Tomlinson, 3 sacks, 1 penalty. Connor McGovern, 4 penalties, 1 sack. Max Mitchell has allowed a sack 2. And I'm going to look up the stats for our buddy Wes Schweitzer because he's going to be filling in for Joe Tippmann at the guard spot. 1 penalty and 1 sack. So that's the Jets' offensive line. As far as their rankings in the league among giving up sacks, I don't think they've been too bad. They've had a couple of injuries. Obviously, Dwayne Brown was one of them, and they flip-flopped some guard play and whatnot. So the Giants have allowed the 2nd most sacks, and the Jets have allowed the 9th most at 20. So this is still a little bit of a vulnerable unit. You go over to the defensive side of the ball. That's where it gets hasty, and that's where we talk about these edge rushers. Jermaine Johnson, 7 quarterback pressures, 2 sacks, 2 quarterback hits, 18 tackles for a loss. 18 tackles, 4 tackles for a loss. Quinnen Williams, talking about him kind of being the Dexter Lawrence, and they play the same position. Ideally, they also came from the same draft class. Half a sack, 3 tackles for loss, 6 quarterback hits, 19 tackles, 12 quarterback pressures. These guys are the middle of their defense. They are the silent horse, but the impactful silent horse because they're not always on the stat sheet. They're getting double-teamed a lot, but they're making their presence known in the backfield. Bryce Huff, 2.5 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, 8 quarterback hits, 9 quarterback pressures, 9 tackles. He is finally sprouting off, and I think he could be a player that gets 5 to 7 sacks for the Jets this year. They got to produce more sacks, though. A lot of Jet fans will tell you that. But I am proud, I guess, from an outsider standpoint, not even looking at this game, that they've given him more snaps because it's just been for years now. The analytics and the statistics have shown Bryce Huff on 3rd down is among the elite pass rushers and what he can do. And the Jets weren't giving him a chance. He was behind Carl Lawson. He was behind Jacob Martin. He was behind some of these other guys. and now he's getting that chance. So I'm happy for him, but can we stonewall him this game, please? You got Quentin Jefferson, the former Seattle Seahawk, 3 sacks on the season, 13 tackles, 2 for a loss, 6 quarterback hits, 9 quarterback pressures. John Franklin Myers, 1 sack, 8 quarterback hits, 14 tackles, 2 for a loss, 16 quarterback pressures. We move to the one linebacker I'm looking at. I'll be fair. I will also look at C.J. Mosley, even though I think Quincy Williams has played better. But as for Mr. Quincy Williams, so Quincy Williams on the year, 60 tackles, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery, a forced fumble, 5 pass deflections. He's got 4 QB hits, 6 tackles for a loss. In coverage, hasn't been great, has allowed 3 touchdowns, but that's not really what you're looking for him to do. 105.7 passer rating, 71.4 completion percentage allowed, and also 5 quarterback pressures in addition to the sack numbers and all that. Now, C.J. Mosley, you take a look at Mr. C.J. Mosley, former Baltimore Ravens, so Wink knows him well. 59 tackles on the year, 1 quarterback hit, 3 tackles for a loss. Pass deflections at 4, and then 1 forced fumble to go along with no quarterback pressures, 77.1 passer rating and coverage, which isn't bad. He's got an interception that was going up against Patrick Mahomes, 73.3 completion percentage allowed, 200 yards. And then we move to the secondary, where we got Mr. Sauce Gardner, 3 pass deflections, a forced fumble, no touchdowns allowed on the year yet, but he's given up a higher completion percentage than last year, about 20.4 points higher at 73.9, 152 yards, 91.2 passer rating, but again, hasn't given up a touchdown, so you really can't complain. DJ Reed, as far as he goes, he's been injured a little bit. Concussion, I believe, was the injury for him, and he also had another injury too. 28 tackles on the year, 97.9 passer rating allowed, no touchdowns allowed, a completion percentage of 76.2. So there's that. And then also we have to talk about the slot corner, Michael Carter II. 2 pass deflections on the season, 59.3 completion percentage, which is really good for a slot corner. Usually they're targeted a lot, and he's not. I mean, 59.3 completion percentage, very good. 1 touchdown allowed, 88 passer rating, 1 quarterback pressure, and 24 tackles on the season. So before we get to top matchups, talk about our ad. SeatGeek. So if you guys are going to a ball game, you guys are going to a concert, you need parking passes for a tailgate, SeatGeek is your one-stop shop. $20 off your entire online order with the promo code Big Blue in the Bronx. That's Big Blue in the Bronx, the name of the podcast, name of the channel, all that sort of good stuff. All right, so we move on to top matchups. My number 1 matchup, Deonte Banks or Adoree Jackson, but I would love for it to be Deonte Banks versus Garrett Wilson. Deonte Banks, he's been tested. He's got some very good stats on the year, some among top corners in the league. He's allowed a passer rating of 68.3, 2 touchdowns, but a completion percentage of 48.7. Plus, he's got a pick that coming up against Sam Howell. So, Garrett Wilson, obviously he's a very good receiver. I would argue more than very good, but his quarterback, I think, is holding his production back in Mr. Zach Wilson. And if Deonte Banks can kind of do that baiting thing that he did to Sam Howell against the Commanders, I think he could make room for some turnovers. And I think there's going to be a fair share of wins. I don't think Wilson will be locked down to like 18 yards. I think Garrett Wilson's going to have his fair share of wins, and I think Banks will have his fair share of wins. But who wins it in the end? I want to be talking and say, hey, I think Deonte Banks won this matchup. You move on. Now that we know he's playing JMS versus Quinnen Williams. Now that does move Ben Bredeson to another position, so maybe they put Bredeson at left guard, with McKeithen probably exiting the lineup, which is a good thing because again McKeithen doesn't know how to put his hands on anybody, and then Glowinski as well. So you wonder, JMS Quinnen Williams, it's going to be a rough test, but it's going to be a strong test too. And he's going to be facing these guys over the course of his career if he proves to be a good center in this league, because you got the Eagles, you got the Cowboys, you got the Commanders. You got Bryce Huff versus Evan Neal or Tyree Phillips. I think it's going to be Evan Neal this week. And Evan Neal, he obviously played decent against Buffalo. You didn't really hear his name too much. Bryce Huff He's not a superior pass rusher. He's not what Von Miller was in the league so many years ago. He's not Khalil Mack, Max Crosby, but he's a solid pass rusher. And we're really trying to see what Evan Neal has improved on over the past week, even though he's dealt with that injury. We're trying to make this a litmus test for him because, hey, we're basically at the middle of the season. Evan Neal, have you come up a little bit since your injury? Have you improved your play, your footwork, your technique, or have you not? And we might have to move you inside the guard. This one I'm a little scared of. Jermaine Johnson versus Justin Pugh. Johnson has a ton of speed to power. I love that about him. I love that about him coming out of college. And Pugh, he's not fast enough to kind of block that up. So, in my opinion, I would put Daniel Bellinger to Pugh's side and help out Justin Pugh against Jermaine Johnson. Again, Pugh's a guard playing tackle, and the Giants don't have many capable tackles at this moment. Parrott was obviously put on IR, so as far as Justin Pugh goes, help him out a little bit. That's going to be a matchup that the Jet fans really want to see and that they really want to take advantage of. Quincy Williams versus Saquon Barkley. Speed against Barkley. Again, he's coming back from this ankle injury. I don't think he's 100% yet. Maybe this is the game he goes off. And he's got this vengeance, right? You know, he's talked about before. This is a game that's still on my mind from how many years ago because of the 1 yard I got on 13 carries. Well, let's not do that again. Let's not do that again. Let's get some more yards. More yards per carry. How about let's get a touchdown too, maybe? Jalen Hyatt versus Sauce Gardner, maybe, and Darius Slayton versus DJ Reed. We're going to see that. I think Tyrod's definitely going to take some chances against the secondary. I don't think he's too scared. What I will say is this, though. I said it on the Bubs on Sports podcast that I appeared on Thursday, I believe it was. People are going to talk about this Jalen Hyatt Sauce matchup, you know, coming from the preseason. I don't think it's going to be a consistent matchup. What am I saying by that? Why am I saying, you know, that sort of stuff? Jalen Hyatt so far has proved to be a receiver that's just going to get chunk yardage. He's not going to be consistent like 6-7 catches a game. That's probably going to be more of a Darren Waller or a Darius Slayton, and, you know, Tyrod Taylor will probably spread the ball. Right now, it's just chunk plays. Now, who Jalen Hyatt maybe gets those chunk plays against, you look at that matchup and you see, okay, maybe he got those chunk plays against Sauce Gardner. Maybe he did it against DJ Reed. Who knows, right? But those matchups are definitely going to be anticipated. Dexter Lawrence versus Connor McGovern and Wes Schweitzer. I definitely think the double team is going to be there. No question about it. But I do need Leo Williams to win against Laken Tomlinson. Tomlinson has had a bounce-back season thus far. He hasn't played too badly compared to last year, where last year he was just god-awful. I think he allowed north of 5-6 sacks. But I need Leo to do his job because, you know, obviously he refined some technique stuff last week. That's how we got to the quarterback a few times. I need him to do his job, especially with the Giants. They're going to be blitzing, but the Giants also need to win when it's 4 or 5-man rush situations. And then also talking about rushing situations, Kayvon Thibodeau versus Mekhi Becton or Max Mitchell. He'll probably play both sides. If I'm looking at it as of right now, let me look at it from the real perspective, and then I'm going to look at it from, okay, this has to be the perspective of this guy is a 5th overall pick. Real perspective. If I'm going to be honest, Giant fans disagree. I don't think Kayvon Thibodeau is winning many matchups against Mekhi Becton. I don't. Becton has the talent to, you know, be a solid tackle in this league. I don't think he's going to be at the Andrew Thomas level because he's missed so much time. He may be back in a Jets uniform next year. He might not be. You know, that's obviously not our decision. It's not really our thing to care about, to be honest. But Kayvon Thibodeau needs to be a little bit more consistent. And in that, I might as well bring this up. We obviously heard over, you know, the past week that whole debacle between Brendan Tierney, Sal Licata, and Carl Banks. Now, I disagree with them both. I think that noise is often weak, and evidence and argument wins over that. And Brandon Tierney and Sal Licata decided not to bring evidence to the table. They decided to analyze Kayvon Thibodeau's game like a bunch of 8-year-olds who never watched football in their entire life. They were talking about his body, his size, he's slow, he can't play linebacker, he can't catch a pick six. It's a bunch of nonsense. That's unfortunately what WFAN, really sports talk radio, has become. Now, you guys are going to question, why do I disagree with Carl Banks? Because he did say, Kayvon's explosive. He's done all these different things. He's excellent. I wouldn't agree with that. Now, I'm not saying he's a bust. He's got 5.5 sacks. That leads the team. However, you would like him to be more of an impact player, more of a consistent player. Sack totals, that's one thing, right? I know he's probably not going to get double-digit sacks because this is the Wink Martindale scheme where nobody gets double-digit sacks, but he needs to be an impact player. 5th overall pick from last year, that's why the Giants drafted him. And if you're talking about 5th overall pick standards, he should be winning those matchups against Mekhi Becton. Top tackle in the league picked how many years ago versus top edge rusher in the league picked a couple of years ago, or at least in college football. You would expect him to win that matchup, and I think he's going to win some matchups against Max Mitchell. If he doesn't, I'm going to be really weirded out, and especially if he goes up against Jeremy Rucker. I mean, I would be very weirded out, especially coming off this Washington game, but my oh my, if he doesn't get a sack against Max Mitchell, if he doesn't win some matchups against Becton, I will be disappointed. So let's talk about keys to win. Number one for me is put Zach in jail. I know a lot of people are going to say score points, this, that, and the other thing. Maybe that's a point we'll make. Maybe that's a point we won't make. But put Zach in jail. I know, yes, the Jets defense is totally at the top of this league. Their yardage may not be in the best of categories, but nonetheless, they play like a top 10, top 15 unit. And it's going to be tough for this offensive line to handle and whatnot. But I need the Giants to contain Zach Wilson. I need them to put him in jail. I need them to force Jet fans to start ranting on Zach Wilson, to start raving on Zach Wilson, to start rethinking their options, to start, not that I want people to trash Zach Wilson, but I want the Giants defense to reinstore that narrative. I want them to play so hard out of their friggin' minds against Zach Wilson. Maybe the narrative will come out, hey, listen, him spending time with his girlfriend wasn't such a good thing. I know Sean Marash made a point about that. I personally think that's irrelevant because that's just digging for straws. But again, put Zach in jail. When he rolls out of the pocket, contain him. Cover the receivers downfield. If he doesn't roll out of the pocket, make it so that, Breece Hall doesn't have anywhere to go and he's forced to pass, and then he's in the pocket, he crumbles like a fucking cookie. Number 2, protect up front. That is going to be key number 2. The Giants need to protect up front with all of their might. Jermaine Johnson, we all mentioned all the names, but they need to block up against those names. They need to scheme it up, whether it's quick passes, and they know the quick passes are coming. Jeff Ulbrich brought it up. He says, we're mostly a zone defense team, but if they bring out the quick passes, we're going to tighten our coverage. So the Giants may have to rethink some of their game plan. But protect up front. You got to protect up front. And number 3, score points in time of possession. This is not at all going to be a high-scoring game. If it's 27-31 like the last time, I will come on here and say I'm wrong. But score points, execute on offense, those mistakes can't happen. Special teams where you fumble in the red zone, that can't happen. The Giants have to score more than 14 points for a chance. Maybe. But they got to score more points than the Jets to win this game. That's the objective. We don't want ties. We don't like ties. But they got to score points against this defense. Get what they can. Execute, take risks, and win the time of possession game. Overall, though, Giants, I have them winning this game. I've predicted them to win 3 times now. I'm 1-1 in that area, so we'll see what I am out of this weekend. I also predicted them to lose against the Commanders, and they won. So I guess that's, woohoo, undefeated legacy jerseys. But I have them winning 17-14. Close game, not high scoring. I will say this, right, before we go to the interview section with Matt O'Leary. There's a lot of people out here, Jets and Giants both, saying that the Giants really don't have a chance. I disagree. I'm not calling the Jets frauds at 3-3. Your record states the type of team you are. Obviously, there's that famous Bill Parcells quote. But my thing is this, right? The Giants have played some impeccable defense over the last 2 weeks. They held up Buffalo pretty well. The Commanders, they went back home, sacked Sam Howell 6 times, forced him to throw an interception. I mean, Sam Howell's a little bit better of a quarterback, in my opinion, than Zach Wilson. And we talk about, oh, the Giants can't score points. The Jets can't score points either. They literally have it through Breece Hall. And then again, too, defenses, I guess, haven't caught on to the fact, hey, they run it first and second down most of the time. That's why those percentages are up. They're, what is it? I think it's like 8th in first down run percentage. So they are predictable. And there's a lot of things you could do. So don't get it twisted. I think the Jets should win this game. If they're truly a 3-3 team, they should win this game. I don't think they will, though, because I think the Giants, in some of these situations, are better coached. Though they haven't shown it much this season, I think they're better coached. I could be wrong, and I could totally be an effing clown, but hey, we'll see. Let's go to the discussion portion with Mr. Matt O'Leary. We'll send it over now.
All right, so now I am with Matt O'Leary, who is a very much known figure in the Jets community on YouTube. And I got to ask you to start, Matt. What are your thoughts coming in this game? The Jets are off a bye week, and it's always close between the Jets and the Giants, no matter how good or bad these teams are.
Yeah, obviously for the Jets, I think they went into the bye week with some confidence after that big upset win over the Eagles, and now come out and are looking to take care of business against the Giants team, who got off to a slow start, but to their credit, has played better football the last 2 weeks, and they can't overlook this Giants team. They have played very, very well defensively, especially the last 2 weeks. And as you said, like, it doesn't seem to matter where these teams are in the standings. It's a rivalry game. I expect it to be a tight game. And I don't think either team runs away with this one.
Absolutely. So, just a general question beforehand, because this is kind of leaked into this week, and I want to get another Jets fan's perspective on it. I've asked two already. What are your thoughts? More like, do you have legitimate distaste on how Robert Saleh has handled injuries thus far, process and word wise?
Um, Not really. Like, I don't think it's a huge deal. Is it a little frustrating to the fan maybe who's trying to follow along with it? Yeah, I guess, and to that extent, I would say that it's not always the easiest of things to deal with him, but in the grand scheme of things, I think it's a pretty small flaw or weakness to have for a coach. Like, if his description of these injuries is going to be the worst thing about him, then that's what I'll put up with. It seems like whatever he says, the opposite tends to happen. To me, it feels like, I don't know. I've just kind of laughed it off if he says something. And for instance, last week or I guess 2 weeks ago now, before the Eagles game, he's pretty confident that DJ Reed was going to get cleared. But some of it also, I think, is gamesmanship too. I don't think he wants to give too much away to their opponents.
Right. So we move into the top headline. It's always been the top headline with the Jets, and that's happened to be the story of Zach Wilson. Was benched twice last year, came on in relief of Rodgers in that first game where he got hurt. Has had some good and bad games, but in my opinion, from what I've seen, I've watched a lot of Jet games, not like tremendous improvements. He's a game manager at this point. What are your thoughts on how he's played this far? Are you taking it game by game? And do you fear possible mistakes versus this Giants defense?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that could come into the fold. He's someone who so far in his career, he's had the tendency to turn the ball over. Although this year, in comparison to his first 2 years in the league, his turnover worthy play percentage is way down. His adjusted completion percentage is way up. So while the box score stats aren't jumping out, and there are absolutely areas where he could improve. He needs to start getting the ball into the end zone a little bit more. The red zone efficiency needs to be significantly better, but something he's done a better job at is he isn't missing those easy throws or easy reads anymore. His first 2 years in the league, he was literally bouncing screen passes or dirting balls on a screen, which is just, incredibly frustrating. So the accuracy has improved. And the amount that he's turning the ball over has also improved. Again, this is not saying that this is some saved guy and that he's the future of the franchise. I'm not, quite there yet, but I think he went from someone who was legitimately unplayable in the second half of last year to someone who could at least you could have a serviceable game manager, the 25th best quarterback in the league, somewhere in that range, rather than, like I said, someone who you just couldn't put on the football field.
Right. Moving to the running back room, it was put out on Thursday that Dalvin Cook is a little bit dissatisfied with his role with the Jets. Obviously, they signed him in August, and he hasn't gotten off to the fastest start. And also, to be fair, in his case, Brees Hall has been a little bit more ready than expected. With that being said, what are your thoughts on that? And do you think it's at some point down the line you got to give Izzy Abanikanda some snaps?
Yeah, I would love to see more of the rookie Izzy Abanikanda. We haven't really seen him in the regular season this year, but I thought he had some nice moments in the preseason. For me, with Dalvin Cook, I don't really understand his frustration. I know he's not getting the ball a ton, but he didn't really do a lot the first few weeks to justify him getting the ball at this point. And he was brought in to be I don't want to say the workhorse back, but someone who could help out with the workload with Brees Hall early on as he was being ramped up from recovering from his ACL injury. But the problem was that Dalvin Cook missed time during training camp and didn't play in the preseason. So it was almost like the first few games of this year was a ramp up period for him. But he was always kind of a back, even in Minnesota, that needed a big workload to get going and then would finally pop off that big run. But he was never going to get that with the Jets. He was always going to be, the second running back behind Brees Hall once Hall was, fully ready to go. And it seems like that's been the case the last few weeks that Brees is, back and looking like the guy he was as a rookie. So I'm not exactly sure what he was expecting here, signing with the Jets that had Brees Hall coming back.
Right. So to go before we go to the wide receiver core, let's go to the offensive coordinator. What are your thoughts so far on Nathaniel Hackett? Obviously, the play calling has changed because Zach Wilson's the QB. Um, in my opinion, I think he's done an okay job, but my biggest concern, if I was a Jet fan with him, is a lot of those first and second down runs. And I get it, Zach is a limited quarterback and Brees Hall is a great talent, but sometimes that's very predictable on offense, first and second down runs. What are your overall thoughts on Nathaniel Hackett?
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you bring up. At times, he could be predictable, and it was frustrating. I think early on in the season, it was a little bit worse. Like against Dallas and New England, you knew it was going to be run on first down, run on second down, pass on third down. And against the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, those two games in particular, I thought that was his two best game plans, and he came out and he was more aggressive on early downs, and they use the play action more, which is something that Zach Wilson actually does well. And when you have a running back like Brees Hall, teams are going to bite on the play action because, they think they're going to give him the ball. And then, the play action also opens up the run game. So I liked the two games again against Kansas City and Philadelphia, where they were a little more aggressive on early downs and were throwing it a little bit more, and, I'm not saying that throwing the ball with Zach Wilson 40 plus times is a recipe for success. It's probably not, but I don't think you can throw the ball 20 to 25 times. I think you have to be a little bit more balanced. And I hope coming out of the bye, that's something that they continue to do is be aggressive on early downs.
Absolutely. So you move into the receiving core. Now, personally, me, in doing my preview beforehand and stuff like that, I'm looking at this wide receiver core, and a lot really doesn't jump out to me. Now, Garrett Wilson's obviously a stud. If a quarterback gets him the ball, he can do a lot of things with it. You guys traded McCole Hardman because of the lack of usage. Xavier Gibson is starting to find ways into the offense after being a very good punt returner. What an NFL debut he had. Randall Cobb looks really washed. And then Alan Lazard, I think he's a solid receiver. How satisfied are you with the receiving core? And do you think Joe Douglas will make a move at the deadline to get a receiver?
I think he should. I definitely think the Jets should add a receiver. The guy that I would really love to see them add is Cortland Sutton from Denver, who looks like, they're going to, blow this up at the deadline and just go full tank mode. Adding a bigger receiver like that, number one, helps in the red zone, which is an area where they really struggle. And then number two, that allows them to move Garrett Wilson back into the slot, which is something they used him a lot in last year. And I thought he had success. And, right now with their current personnel, they don't really have that luxury of being able to move him into the slot as much because Randall Cobb and Xavier Gibson are more, your standard, slot receivers. I'm with you. Randall Cobb, 40% drop rate is way, way, way too high. I understood, bringing him in originally, it looked like he was going to be like their fifth receiver on the depth chart, and that wouldn't have been as big of a deal. And with Aaron Rodgers, okay, like they have chemistry. I had no issue with that. But Corey Davis surprisingly retires or steps away from football right before the season starts. And then Mecole Hardman, falls out of favor, a lot of it having to do with the emergence of Xavier Gibson. And suddenly Randall Cobb's now your third receiver, which is something that I don't think is ideal. I do like Alan Lazard. I think he's just, he's a steady, solid receiver. He's not a superstar, but I think he's, a solid pro, does a lot of the little things right. Like he's a really good run blocker, which in this offense with Brees Hall and a limited quarterback is going to matter. And he is a, big body contested catch guy. So I think adding another one of those stylistic receivers would help open up Garrett Wilson moving into the slot a little bit more. So I would like to see him make a move at the deadline.
Right. And what are your thoughts on the usage of the tight ends? Now, I don't have the snap percentages right in front of me, but Jeremy Ruckert, when he's on the field, he's a solid tight end, and he's your best run blocker at the line of scrimmage. But over the last few weeks, is he winning snaps over CJ Uzama and Tyler Conklin? Is he not winning those snaps? And do you think he should be?
Yeah, so over the last few weeks, he has kind of jumped into that tight end 2 role over CJ Uzama, which I really am a big fan of. I think that's the right decision. As you mentioned, he by far is their best run blocker. Now, Tyler Conklin's been pretty productive the last few weeks and is starting to build some nice chemistry with Zach Wilson. So I understand why they want to use him in the receiving game. But for me, I think Jeremy Ruckert, with his blocking ability, has to be on the field as the second tight end. And he also, I think, is an underrated pass catcher. I always thought, even going back to his days at Ohio State, he was an underrated pass catcher there. And, CJ Uzama is a really good locker room guy, and he does have some value. But for me, I think, at this point in his career, it seems obvious that Ruckert surpassed him. And I think as the season goes on, and especially into next year, I would anticipate Ruckert getting more usage as he should.
Exactly. So, moving on to the offensive line before we switch up to the defense, which is, well, arguably more exciting for both teams. What are your thoughts on this O line configuration? Obviously, there was a couple move arounds. Dwayne Brown started, they went IR. Mekhi Becton has played at left tackle primarily. So, what are your thoughts on the configuration of this O line and maybe Mekhi Becton's future as a Jet beyond 2023?
Yeah, so shout out to Mekhi Becton because he starts the year at right tackle, then due to injury with Dwayne Brown has to move over to the left side, and he's held it down pretty well. The biggest thing for Mekhi Becton was never a talent question; it was just health. And so far this year, he has remained healthy, and I hope that continues and he plays a full 17 game season. And I would look to bring him back if he does that because, like I said, when he's on the field, he seems to be that guy. And whether it's left tackle or right tackle, I think you find a spot for him. The unfortunate thing for me with this offensive line was losing Elijah Vera Tucker for the season. He is such a talented piece because you can play him at guard and he plays at a high level, or you can play him at tackle and he plays at a high level. He's honestly this year looked better at right tackle than he did at right guard, which was something I wasn't necessarily expecting. But losing him is really a bummer. Max Mitchell, I think, has done a pretty good job filling in. Obviously, not at the same level, doesn't have the same ceiling, but has held it down fine. And right now for this game, Joe Tippmann is a question of whether he'll play or not. He dealt with a thigh injury in the game against Philadelphia. I think he's looked really good as a rookie. I'm excited about his future, but I would be surprised if he played this week based on some of the reports, and he hasn't practiced yet this week. So that just in the future, I'm excited about him. But McGovern and Laken Tomlinson at center and left guard, they're two veterans. You kind of know what you're getting with them. They're both they're not phenomenal players, but they're, average starters. And, I think all in all, the line has been okay. I don't think it's a stellar unit. I think it definitely improved as the year has gone on. But it is a unit that's dealing with some injuries. So there are question marks along that unit as well.
Okay. Moving to the defense. Now, there's a couple parts in this one, but I'll split it up. How great is it to have a forte of very talented pass rushers? And also, I was looking up this stat as a part of the preview. The Jets aren't very high in the amount of sacks they're getting, but the pressure is there. Is that something? Because I know you were giving us some analytics about Zach Wilson. I'm going to make the guess that you're very analytical, as am I. But are you very much happy with that, and also them just forcing the pressure, and just overall, yeah, how great is it to have a forte of very much talented pass rushers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, eventually you want to get sacks, right? Like that's the goal, but it's not always the best way I think to evaluate a defensive line or a pass rusher. I think pressures are really important too because that gets the quarterback to make mistakes, and the Jets have done a really good job this year in creating turnovers. You look at the games they've had against Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes; they did a good job of getting pressure and getting them to turn the ball over. And I love that they're a deep unit. They can rotate guys on the edge and even on the interior. There's been some unsung heroes like, we know the big names like Quinnen Williams in the interior is just a really special player. And that's someone who the sacks really aren't there this year as compared to last year. But I think he's played just as well with the amount of pressure he's getting on the quarterback. They're creating mistakes. And someone that I really love to watch on the edge now who's getting a bigger role is Bryce Huff. I mean, he just racks up the pressures, and Jet fans have been yelling and screaming to get him on the field now more for about 2 or 3 years, and it's been working. I hope he's someone that they look to give a contract extension to, but yeah, it's a really deep unit, and for this game in particular against the Giants, who's their offensive line's a little beat up right now. It's a unit that usually tends to struggle for them. I would look for this Jets defensive line to try to bring the heat against either Tyrod Taylor or Daniel Jones.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question to kind of add on to that as well is you guys took a pass rusher in the first round by the name of Will McDonald. And, we know this is kind of the situation with Carl Lawson over the last few weeks. And again, you guys have a forte of talented pass rushers. So it's kind of a conundrum getting them all snap percentage, being fair and whatnot. But do you think that Will McDonald should get more snaps?
Yeah, I definitely do, and I think he will as the year goes on. It with the trade rumors and things like that leading up to the deadline, it very much so feels like Carl Lawson's going to get moved before the deadline on Tuesday, and he's even been inactive a few times. It's really a shame. I was excited when they brought him in, but injuries have kind of taken over at this point, and he doesn't look like that same guy, even what he was last year. It looks like that back that he had that he was dealing with over the summer is kind of carried over this year. But I wouldn't be surprised if they moved off of him, which then I think opens up a role for Will McDonald, who hasn't really played a ton yet. And I understand fans are frustrated; they want to see their first round pick out on the field. Edge is always a position to me that I think takes guys a few years. Usually, I mean, you have those rare ones who just come into league and pop right away, but I think it's a hard position to translate to in the NFL. And you look at last year, the Jets drafted Jermaine Johnson in the first round, and he had a kind of similar role in his first year. He didn't play a ton of snaps, but for the last few games in year two, he started to look like the guy you thought you were getting when you took him in the first round. So I think it takes these guys a little bit. So I'm not worried about Will McDonald yet, but I do think he's someone that I would imagine gets more snaps as the season goes on.
Everyone talks about, the heads of the Jets defense, right? You run up Quinnen Williams. Another name is CJ Mosley. But as I said, I watch a lot of Jet games because they're obviously in the area and I have a Jet fan brother. How much of a nice surprise has Quincy Williams been?
Yeah, to me, Quincy's been better than CJ Mosley, and that's not a knock against Mosley. I think he's actually been pretty well, played pretty well this year. But Quincy Williams was someone who, his first 2 years with the Jets, a very hit or miss player. The highs were very, very high, but the lows were really low. And this year, the lows are just completely gone. He's flying around the field. He's making great reads. He's significantly better in coverage, which was an area of concern his first couple of years. And something else that really, plagued him early on in his careers was missed tackles. And that missed tackle rate has significantly improved this year as well. But it's really awesome to see both, Quincy and Quinn out there on the same defense. It seemed like retaining Quincy Williams was almost like a favor to keep Quinn Williams around and keep him happy. But honestly, Quincy Williams has been the best player on this defense, and this defense has a lot of really talented guys on it. So, and able to say that is impressive in itself. But yeah, his growth this year is truly, truly remarkable, and he's playing like one of the best linebackers in football right now.
Right. And we move to the secondary. How do you Is there any differences from this year to last year based on the way they've played? I mean, I looked at passer rating. I looked at a couple other different stats in terms of coverage. It seems like there might be a slight like regression for DJ Reed and Sauce. Is it because maybe they're playing more zone and that's not really what they're, used for and stuff like that? Like I could probably guess that Sauce is more of a man corner. Do you think there's been a slight regression, or you think it's just, the stats say a different story?
Really, I think the only game that the Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed duo struggled with was week one against Buffalo. Both missed the game against the Philadelphia Eagles the last time out before the bye, but I thought both those guys struggled then and then kind of came into their own a little bit better against Dallas. I know Sauce had the drop to pick six against Dallas, which would have been nice to reel in, but in coverage, I think they've kind of gotten better as the years gone on. So I don't know if I would go as far as saying like the stats are misleading. They're probably not at that level that they were last year, which was just unbelievable. Like they were just playing at an insane level, but I still think they are, one of the best corner duos in the sport. I think, both guys are still really solid cornerbacks. And when you add the slot corner, Michael Carter the second into the mix, I mean, he's played just as well as he did last year. So I still think this is a very, very talented group. And I don't really have any concern with them going forward here.
So moving more further into the game preview, from an evaluation and a fan standpoint, which matchups side by side, it could be position and position or player against player, are you looking forward to seeing?
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest thing that I'll be looking for is on both sides, but both defensive lines going up against the opposing offensive lines because the Jets defensive line is their strength, and the Giants offensive line is one of their weaker points. But at the same time, the Giants defensive line has really come into its own. As I mentioned, the last 2 weeks they allowed 7 points and 14 points in their last two games, and the Jets offensive line dealing with some injuries and playing a backup right tackle and backup right guard could allow for some opportunities for that Giants defensive line to get pressure. So and it's probably going to be a game where both teams are playing their backup quarterback. So I'd imagine Tyrod Taylor's probably starting for the Giants this week, and Zach Wilson will be starting for the Jets this week. So I think if the defensive line could get pressure and potentially make the quarterback make mistakes, that's going to be a really big key in this game.
Absolutely. So, two X factors, one on offense, one on defense for the New York Jets on Sunday.
Yeah, for me on the offensive side of the ball, I really think this is going to be a big Brees Hall game. Last time out against Philadelphia, they didn't really run him as much as what they did against Denver. He got 12 carries, and going up against the Philadelphia Eagles run defense is one of the best in football, if not the best in football. So I understood why he didn't get as much run. But against this Giants team, I think one of the ways you could attack this, defense of Wink Martindale's, which he loves to bring the pressure. I think running the football would be the Jets' best recipe for success in this game. And I think he would be utilized a lot in this one. And on the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to say Bryce Huff, who's a guy that I mentioned already earlier on. But the Giants offensive line we brought up has been a weaker point, and going up against potentially a backup tackle too, depending on injuries with Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal, I think would be a good spot for him to continue to get pressures. I believe he had 9 in the game against Philadelphia. It was just an insane number, and I think he could have that kind of impact again on Sunday.
Absolutely. And if you're game planning against the Giants, one offensive X factor that you're looking for, game planning that's on the Giants, and one on the defense.
Yeah, so for on the Giants side of things, on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, I'm looking at for me, Saquon, I think, is an obvious focal point on the offensive side of the ball. It very much so looks like their offense is different when he's in versus when he's out. The games that he missed, they really, really struggled to move the football, and they looked a little bit better doing that. I know the points aren't there, but I think their offense has looked a little bit better the last couple of weeks. And I think they would like to get him involved because you know how that Jets defense, they love to get after the quarterback, and they're really an aggressive unit. So if you could work in some counters or and running the ball, I think that would probably be the Giants' best recipe for success. And on the defensive side of the ball, I really liked the play of Dexter Lawrence. It's hard not to, right? Like both him and Quinnen Williams come from the same draft class, and he really wreaks a lot of havoc in the middle of that defensive line. And potentially going up against a backup right guard, I would imagine Wes Schweitzer's probably starting at right guard. That could be a mismatch there. And, Zach Wilson under pressure isn't always the best thing. So I would be looking at him on the defensive line.
Definitely. And who do you think is going to win this game?
Yeah, I do think it's going to be a tight game and a low scoring game. I'll pick the Jets. I think like a 19-13 kind of game. I don't expect there to be a ton of scoring. But for me, I think when you look at just these two teams, the Giants have really struggled to score points. And with this Jets aggressive defense and what they've done to quarterbacks in this league, I think that it's going to be a tough day for the Giants offensively. But, as we mentioned, Giants defense has played well. The Jets offenses have struggled, especially in the red zone. So I don't think they're running away with it. I think it'll be a really tight game, but I do think the Jets end up pulling off this win.
And lastly, you do a lot of different things in the Jets community. Where can people find you and where your work is?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on social media and on YouTube at Matt O'Leary NY. Do daily Jets videos over there. There's a long form podcast, Just Jets, comes out every single Wednesday. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you can find me talking Jets football. So I appreciate it if you follow along.
I'm pretty sure you do. To my knowledge, you still do that. The live show with what is it? There's the
The talking Jets.
Ryan
Yeah,
from Jets
Ryan
Talk 24/7, and there's God, why am I forgetting his
Green
name?
Bean.
Green
Yeah,
Bean. That's his
there we
name.
go. Yeah, every
So
Tuesday, 8 to 10.
every Tuesday. So I appreciate Matt coming on. If you ever meet this guy, from what I to know, he's really tall. Those are just what I'm hearing, but I'm pretty sure that's true. Anyway, we appreciate you guys for tuning in. Once again, check out all of Matt's stuff and all that. Appreciate you guys. Let's see what the Giants do on Sunday. Of course, I'll be at the game as a part of the media, and we'll see you next time. Let's go, Big Blue.